How many of you were singing that last night? I'll meet you in the morning. We're here, right? We made it this far. That's a new one for me. That's my first time ever singing that song. Thank you, Joel, for introducing a new song. I don't know if the rest of you have sung it before, but I enjoyed that. I also enjoy being here with you and the opportunity to actually be with you all in the presence of God Almighty. And what a blessing. Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we should be called the children of God. What love he has bestowed upon us today. We will begin this lesson in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1. And while you're turning on over to the book of Ecclesiastes, we are getting closer and closer, less and less little hiccups here and there for our Sunday morning service from the transition from outdoor to indoor. But I'm assuming at this point that if someone can't hear me on Zoom, they will let me know, or Laura will let me know. Sounds like everything's going just fine. Ecclesiastes, writings of the wise man. Very reflective, it's like looking back, it's just the way things are. Could somebody help this lady find a seat? Tony, maybe? Welcome. Wait, you just gave her a hug, you know? Oh. Oh. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right. We just love putting people on the spot out here, you know? Okay, so Ecclesiastes. Very reflective, as I was saying just a moment ago. The wise man is writing from a very unique perspective. This is a very unique piece of text within our Holy Bible. And the way he starts, I'm going to read just a little bit. Beginning of verse 4, and we'll read to about verse 10. So Ecclesiastes 1, verses 4 through 10. It says, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also arises and the sun goes down and hastes to his place where he arose. The wind goes toward the south and turns about into the north, whirls about continually, and the wind returns again according to his circuits. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. Unto the place from where the rivers came, there they return again. All things are full of labor, man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that has been, it is which shall be. And that which is done is that which shall be done. There is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new, has been already of old time, which was before us. I really like this, and this is a commonly quoted text throughout just Christianity in general. It's one of those things when we, especially when an older generation is, counseling or saying something to a younger generation that says, hey, there's nothing new under the sun. That's a statement that's so true. No matter how unique we might think we are, no matter what we're going through, no matter what happens, the only thing that might be new And I just have to say this. The only thing that might be new is every now and then you get someone who's really stunningly good looking like me up here. But that's about the newest thing you can get, okay? But one day I'll be gone, and then it's gonna go on to the old dull way that it used to be. But there's nothing new under the sun, right? I mean, this is a statement that's very true, and generations come and generations go. There's an actual statement right here in this book of Ecclesiastes where he says to the older generation, don't say it was better before. Remember the good old days. You know, that's something that we hear a lot, but he actually says it's not a wise thing to do, not a wise thing to say, not a wise approach to living. First of all, we can say that, and it might be true. You know, for me, it's like the good old 90s. You know, I'm in those 90s. Those were good times, right? You know, and then of course it's different for every generation. For me, from my perspective, I remember the day that smartphones came out, and I still dread that to this day. It's wonderful in some ways, like you all hear on Zoom. There's good things about it, but there's that perspective that the older generation always has, and he actually says, according to the text that's written right here, verse 4, one generation passes away, another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The challenges that we face in this day and age are challenges that have been faced throughout the beginning. We have to take a step back from time to time and notice just the way things are and try to be as objective as we possibly can be and try to do the best of what we got. And that's where we are. That's where we will always be. We're always going to be human. That is never going to change. Humans will always be leaning on the selfish side, thinking about themselves. That's the way it will always be. Now, we Christians, we're supposed to try to rise above that. We're supposed to say, no. We're going to try to, do things differently. We're going to try to live a higher level of morality. We're supposed to be the highest level of morality there is. We're supposed to be looking at Jesus and the way he did things, the way he put others before himself. And, there's all kinds of amazing principles that he established. Whenever we think about this, whenever we move in this kind of direction, where we are is in a moment of what I was talking about last week, transparency. And I wanted to share with you today a little bit more about what we're doing here and what the overall establishing principles really are. I told you last week, and I got all kinds of yelling and screaming at you last week, and I'm glad most of you came back, But what I want to do today is establish just a few of the principles, and they're really, they're principles. Now, it's about the kids program and what we want to do with that. It's the fact that we have to have an established way of doing things for the children. You can take a step back and you can observe that, the way different congregations have always done things. And what we're doing right now is we're just really moving. We're trying to build and really plant and cultivate. And that's going to be the main idea behind the lesson here. Before we go too much farther into that, chapter 3 of the same book of Ecclesiastes, I want to read to you the text there. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. To everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. You just stop right there. I know all you have turn going through your mind right now. That's just the way it is. You'll never get rid of that, by the way. It's done. What was it? The Monkeys who did that? I can't remember what band it was, but for the rest of your life, since the 60s or 70s, they made that song. You read that and you have to have turn. But when you take this and you fit it into what we just read, there's nothing new under the sun. One generation comes, one generation goes, and that's actually a lot about what's kind of going on here. This is a period of time of massive shift in generational approach, generational perspective. Just this past week, we were able to hang out with Dwight for about an hour and a half or so. I mean, he flew an airplane during the time of World War II. You know, he had the Wright brothers, a picture of the Wright brothers plane hanging on his wall. Now, that was like new stuff during that period of time. And you know, you think about it, like this generation, it's like airplanes. I mean, the way people talk about, you know, travel and flying in a plane now is insane. Like 100 years ago, it's like, no way. You know, you can actually just sit in a chair, like you're sitting right now. You're in a seat and actually be soaring through the sky. That's amazing. Now it's like, oh, I have to fly to New York this week, and it's terrible. I can't. Traveling's the worst. You know, we complain about it all the time. You realize you're in the sky, soaring like a bird. You know, I talked about it just a little bit this morning, and I was talking about cell phones and the way people get annoyed with their cell phone when it doesn't do what they want. I'm actually quoting a comedian right now. He thinks very similar to the way I think. In some ways, he's also don't think the way I think in a lot of other ways too. But he was in an interview and he was talking about how he gets really annoyed with people who get annoyed with their phones. You know, it's like it takes like a half a second delay, and they kind of go, oh, you know, and you ever hear somebody say, you know, I'm so sick of this phone. I need a new one, you know, and that's the way people talk. And then he says, let's go into space. Give it a second. But that's the generation that is coming. It's a very, very different generation. You can tell just by looking around, you can tell the way churches think about the generation, the way they think about kids. And there's neither good nor bad. There's just, we have to take a stop and make observations. One generation comes, one generation goes, nothing new under the sun. Some generations are going to be very different from the generations that preceded it. This is one of those periods of time in history. There's lots of tension between the generations. When we were sitting there talking to Dwight this past week, you know, I mean, our kids in particular don't have as much of the technological access that a lot of kids do. But, you know, sitting there talking to a 96-year-old man isn't exactly their idea of a good time. That's hard to do. Now, I thought it was great, but they have to learn that you know, he's not a TV. He doesn't talk like a cartoon, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And this is important stuff. When you look at just the layout of the church building. Now, remember, I said this is a transparency sermon, okay? When you look at the layout of the church building, you can tell that the way the classrooms are, there's literally two. There's two classrooms. When they were building this church building, they were thinking about 5 age groups. We have to take that into consideration. If you look back there, you will see that we did construction to try to open up one room. The generation of kids are to be seen and not heard is not the way it is anymore. Kids are loud. Kids, you know, it ain't go get a switch and come back generation. That's not the way it is anymore. Now, like I said, good or bad, that's not what this lesson's all about. It's we have to keep those things into consideration. Now, the classrooms not only are the only 2, they're tiny, which means they were expected to sit and sit still at one time. You want to have a talk with Katie afterward and ask her how that's going. Okay? So I'm bringing this to your attention because I want you to understand that we have to put enormous amounts of time and thought process into what we're doing. Our teachers have been teaching for about a solid year now, almost a solid year. And one of our goals is to take a look at the situation and realize that That is the way it was. The way I grew up, there was one teacher, the same teacher taught the same age group for like 20 years. That's hard to find these days. It doesn't happen anymore. When a teacher signs up for teaching kids, I know one of the thoughts is, I hope I don't get stuck doing this for the next 10 years. I know that. We are trying with everything we got to make sure that don't happen. But in order to do that, we must have more people, not just the moms teaching their kids. That's the way it's happening right now. Only the moms are teaching their kids right now. We need more good old-fashioned grit. Good old-fashioned people stepping up and helping, but not getting stuck doing. So like I said, transparency sermon, very untraditional for me to get up here and start making these kinds of statements, but that's what I'm gonna do. And you're gonna deal with it, you know? So, to everything there is a season, and every time and every purpose under the heaven. Generations are different, but there's different times for different things. And right now is a time to really start thinking about the next generation. That's one of the things that I'm talking about. But let's take a look at a few more verses here. Verse 2, a time to be born and a time to die. Generational things, right? We just talked about that. Right now we have the generation that was born just a few years ago. And that's what we're talking about. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which has been planted. A time to plant. Now, that right there is going to be one of the main focuses of the lesson today. It's going to be about the cultivation. It's going to be about the building, about the really working on the land, building forgiveness into the land. What I mean by that is the better the land is, the better quality the soil, the better quality the farming, the better it is able to withstand drought. The better it is able to withstand flooding, the better quality. And this is just good old-fashioned, scientific, everyone, can look at these facts and it makes sense. The more time, the more energy, the more emphasis we put on what we're doing with the kids' classes, the better it will be, and the better it will be able to withstand difficulties, because there's a lot of turbulence that the kids these days have to face that are different from what the generations before us had to face. One of the things that I've mentioned, and I've actually had a whole class about it Sunday mornings, is divorce. Divorce is that nasty word nobody wants to talk about. I wish I didn't have to talk about it, but I must. We have to talk about it because that is what the new generation is dealing with. Our new demographic is half of our kids come every other week. One of the actual questions we have been trying to answer and figure out is what are we going to do for those kids to make sure they don't feel left out. That is an actual piece of discussion that we are having in the Bible Brats meetings. Because if we don't, very likely we lose those kids when they turn 18 and move out of the house. I want those kids to know that this church gave it everything they had. Everything they had. They cultivated and they planned and they thought about and they spent hours and hours just thinking about how to make sure these kids just learn about good old Moses and the good old-fashioned stories to make sure that when they grow up, they're ready to face the nasty world out there. And you know that a lot of parents aren't doing that for their kids, but we're going to do at least what we can here to make sure they get it. If we don't, there will be no growth in Brentwood. We must do that for there to be growth here. If we don't plan for the families, Church of Brentwood will be extinct in 20 to 30 years. Look at the churches up and down the California coast. All the good people are moving out of here because they're sick of California, right? Transparency sermon, people. Just laying it all out there. What's Brentwood going to look like in 20, 30 years? I know it's tempting to sell that $1 million house and move and buy 50 acres in the country. And that's what a lot of people are doing. A lot of people are doing that. Meanwhile, we got millions of people in this part of the country, millions, who don't know who God is. So, there's a time to plant, a time to pluck up that which has been planted. What Bible Brats is we plucked up some of the things that we were doing. We said, this ain't working. We're cultivating the land. We're actually going to have the very first training in it that I know of that this congregation has had, at least since I've been here, just to make sure that we are all on the same page. It's going to be on this upcoming Saturday. And like I said, I want you to know, and I want you to understand how many hours we put into that training. So, verse 3, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. You know, we are living during times when there's so much variation, there's so much going on. There's a lot of weeping that's happening. The year 2020 has been a year of a lot of weeping. There's also been good things that have come out of this too. You know, right now, I mean, how many of you are just having a good old time actually hearing other people sing right now? Isn't it a time to rejoice? Because for a solid year, we were worshiping remotely. This should be a time of rejoicing. This should be a time of planning, time of building. Some things have been broken down, some things have been built up. A time to get and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to cast away. Time to sow, or a time to tear and a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time to war and a time of peace. One of the things that I'm emphasizing in the lesson here is these kinds of principles and the generational thing and the way the wise man approaches life and the way life works is we're really applying these kinds of principles with what we're doing. We are living during a time where we really need to stop and reevaluate everything that we're doing. That's just the time period that we are living in. I want to take you now to Proverbs chapter 24, another text from the wise man. Last week, I talked about how we're to be a family. Family is an important thing. The establishment of God. And you take the principle of the time to plant and time to pluck up, time to break down and time to build. We're in a time of renovation. We're in a time of building. And the wise man here writes about a observation that he makes. I like the way he writes because the way I imagine when I read this is him taking a walk. And, if you take a walk in your neighborhood, you can always tell, which houses, things aren't really going all that great, perhaps, in that house. That's not really how we ought to judge, what's going on. You can't always judge a book by its cover. But you can tell sometimes. You can tell which house has been abandoned, right? It's just simple, basic facts here. You take a look at Proverbs chapter 23, beginning in verse 30. I imagine Solomon going on a walk, and then he uses this as an opportunity to teach a massive lesson. He says, "What by the field of the slothful, by the vineyard of the man void of understanding? And lo, it was all grown over with thorns and nettles that covered the face thereof. The stone wall thereof was broken down. Then I saw," that's the way he's writing, then I made an observation and I considered it. He stopped and he used it as an opportunity to really think about what was going on. He said, "I looked upon it and we see instruction. You had a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that travails, and thy lack as an armed man. And I stop and I think about the field of the growth, the field, which is this field right here, the Brentwood Church of Christ. You walk by the field, and what do you see? Do you see, things just kind of broken down? It's kind of funny. There actually was a wall broken down right there, but it was because it was a time to break down and a time to build at the same time, right? Right after, that's a time of renovation. And so you find right here, we're walking by the field right now, and if you walk by the field and you see that field with thorns and you see it not being fruitful, it's not a time to say, oh, well, we tried. It's time to say, what can we do better? That's another point that I actually emphasized a lot in the lesson earlier this morning. The kids studied prayer today. And whenever we pray, we ask God for things. And oftentimes, God doesn't just give you what you want. He's telling you what you need to do. You don't always just ask for God and expect it to happen. You can go ahead and put your hands together right now and say, God, please be with the youth program here. But ain't nothing going to happen if you don't get up and do something about it. We have to understand that the laziness factor here will show or will be the result of what happens. If the program fails, it's because we fail. It's easy to say, oh, kids these days. That's not, you find that in the scripture, you find that in the verse, you come back and you show me. I would love to see that because I'd love to have that excuse. That would make it so easy. Well, I tried. No. That's not what our job is as Christians. We aren't here to just say, well, our job is to look and examine ourselves whether we be in the faith. Our job is to be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your work is never in vain in the Lord. If you're doing the work, there will be results. The word of God does not return void. If you're doing the work, it will accomplish something. Even if that only thing that it accomplishes is you preserved at least the generation to continue, like Noah. Maybe everyone else was consumed in the flood, but Noah was not consumed. And because of that, we're all still here. So we have to understand that it is our duty to always be looking where we can improve, where we can cultivate the soil to make sure that the youth are always taken care of generation after generation, and not just say, well, it was easier when I was a kid, because it ain't that easy perhaps now for these kids today. So we can't take the lazy approach. That would be easy. But if we're going to go down, we're going to go down with me screaming at you. That's what this lesson is about. I want to keep on doing this because I got to stand up here and say, well, what can I do better? Well, I'm just going to stand up here and show them what the good word says about what we ought to be doing for our kids here. That's my job. I'm going to keep on doing it. And I know I won't return void. You can run me out of town if you want. I'm going to make sure that you know that you should be doing something for the kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you don't want to hear it, you got to talk to God about it someday. Well, right now, I'm talking to you about it because He sent me to. So, this field is going to be looking good. When the wise man walks by our field, he's going to behold another instruction. He's going to say, man, those people care. He say, man, those kids look good, and they are noisy as can be, but they look good, and they're there. He's going to walk by the field, and kids are going to be running around talking about prayer. He's going to walk, and he's going to hear kids talking about resilience, talking about faith, talking about Jesus, talking about Moses, talking about Abraham, talking about Enoch, talking about all that good stuff. That's the kids that are going to come out of here. And every family that walks through those doors They're going to be pointed exactly where their kids can go, and those kids are going to learn something too. And they're going to say, those people care. That's what this is all about, because we're going to work hard, and there's been many, many, many hours put into it already, and it's just going to get better, okay? So keep on praying, but like the good old quote says, pray for 20 years without hearing an answer. Finally, pray for my legs. Sometimes it's time to pick up the hammer and get some work done. Right here in the context of Proverbs chapter 24, verse 3. I wanted to show this to you because it fits with the theme, fits with what we're doing right now. When we talk about the vineyard, we talk about the way it looked and the maintenance of the vineyard, the maintenance of the field, and the wall of the field. There's overall encompassing context. Chapter 24 in Proverbs, the whole chapter has this nice ongoing theme, and it actually is well established in verse 3. So Proverbs chapter 24 and verse 3, it says, through wisdom is a house built, and by understanding it is established. So that's right there. Just channeling what we talked about last week, how the church is to be a family. This house right here, this household, we're going to do everything we can to build it on wisdom, build it with understanding. And by doing so, we will find the fruits, not the laziness that we find at the end of the chapter when the field was busted up and the walls broken down. We're not going to let those walls get broken down. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a new sound that starts to ring through our ears. And I want you to hear this sound with me. I'm going to have you move on over to Ezra chapter 3 for a second here. While you're turning on over there, I want you to read a couple of verses with me. I'm going to explain to you some of the context of the story here. The book of Ezra is during the period of time when God made sure his people learned a very, very harsh lesson. They would not do things for God. They would not work for God. They would not worship God the way they're supposed to worship God, and they would not repent. So God says over and over and over again, prophet after prophet, do you understand that Babylon is growing and they're going to tear you up? They are going to come into your land and they are going to pull you and take you captive. I have said it. The Lord has spoken it over and over and over again. You know what the children of Israel did? They said, that was their response. They did not listen. Now, we're not going to do the same thing they did, will we? We're going to read verses like Proverbs 24. We're going to take a look at Ecclesiastes. We're going to take a look at the writings of the epistles. We're going to take a look at what Jesus said. We're going to learn from it. We're going to do something about it. We're going to be workers for the Lord. Now, what happens here, though, is after they learn their lesson through prophecy, King Cyrus of the Medo-Persian Empire finally turns them loose and says, you know what? I'm going to take your hands on a bag of gold. And he says, I'm going to turn you guys, send you back home. You build a temple. Now, can you just imagine? Just imagine it. After 70 years of being in a strange land, just a few came back. Those 200-something people came back to their homeland, to Jerusalem. And Nebuchadnezzar had burned down their temple, destroyed it, just laid it desolate 70 years prior to this. You just imagine what it would feel like to be able to go back home. Go back to the land that God promised. God promised our father Abraham. And then Cyrus gave them that bag of gold and said, okay, now it's time for you to rebuild that temple. Now, this was a very significant moment in Jewish history because of how emotional this would be. And so when they laid down the foundation, and this is the text where they laid down the foundation and they had this, it was this big ceremonial thing. And here's what happens. Ezra chapter 3, verse 12. But many of the priests and the Levites, chief of the fathers, who were ancient men, which means that they were old enough to have seen the temple before, the temple of Solomon. They remembered what it looked like. They remembered those old days, because now they would be in their 80s and 90s, right? And they would just have brief glimpses, like memories of what Jerusalem used to look like. The old temple, the tears in the eyes during the feasts when they would remember the Passover feast. So they would remember what it looked like, what it was like, at least the good times. And It says that they had seen the first house. When the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, they wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy. Verse 13. So that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of the joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud, and the noise was heard afar off. So we have two very different generational perspectives. One generation was more of weeping because remembering the old times, remembering what it was like. They had known at one time what it was like to be free. Now, I don't know what kind of weeping it was. I don't know if it was tears of joy or if it was tears of, oh man, this new temple is pitiful, because it wasn't even close to the original. It was probably complex. It's probably a lot of different kinds of emotions, different reactions, different kinds of tears. But what we know for sure is that they made one sound together. What we want is we want all generations of the church to try to understand each other's different perspectives. The kids are growing up in a very different period of time, even though there's nothing new under the sun. There is nothing new under the sun, but it is very different for them. The challenges are the same and different at the same time. And there's going to be different kinds of sounds. And like I said a moment ago, the generation of kids that have been seen and not heard, that ain't happening anymore. It's going to be new sounds. And we're going to love it. We need to do what we can to make sure that that next generation doesn't make an exodus from the church, but that we actually bring more people in to a saving relationship with Jesus. That is the duty of the Lord's church. Our duty isn't to just have a comfy place to worship. Our duty is to give a place for learning and for growing. So, Jesus, throughout his ministry, would often say, how long am I going to hang out with this generation? What is it with this generation? That's the DMV way of saying it. Jesus would say, oh, faith is the first generation. That generation was a generation of rejecting the Messiah. They had major issues. Things ebb and things flow. But Jesus also said that the field is ready. Matthew chapter 9. There's a story there where Jesus has a perspective, and I want us to think about that perspective for a minute. There's a perspective when Jesus is just doing his thing. He's just doing what Jesus does. Verse 35, Matthew 9. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and preaching the gospel of the kingdom and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. He pretty much walking around teaching people and healing people. That's what he does. I always have a vision of what it looked like in my mind. But even Jesus was confined to a human consciousness. And it's really neat whenever I think about that, because Jesus had a brain, just like we have a brain. He had, if somebody did this, Jesus would hear it and he would look. I mean, every now and then you find a verse where it says, and then when Jesus was made aware of it. What do you mean Jesus made aware? He was aware of everything all the time, but he also, purposefully limited himself to a human existence. Really interesting to think about. And, that right there is a study. You want something neat to study, go ahead and study that. But Jesus had different moods. Sometimes he was probably in a silly mood. Can you just imagine Jesus in a silly mood and how interesting that would have been? But he had different modes of thinking, different moods. Jesus wept, the shortest verse in the Bible. But I feel like we need to be in a period of time. There's a time for everything under the sun, a time for every season. I think we need to be in a period of time where we kind of have this panoramic way of looking at the world like this, because of the tension of generations and the way things are moving in our country and in our community. And it's this perspective right here, because Jesus, it seems like he just kind of takes a step back and he just notices something different. After he's doing all this healing and teaching, verse 36, it says, but when he saw the multitudes. Now that says more than the words just say, is what I think. But when he saw the multitudes, it's like he stopped for a moment and did some people watching. Anybody here like to go to like the mall or the fair just to people watch? It's almost as if that's what Jesus did. He just wanted to people watch for a second. And the way he looked at everybody was, it says like this: he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, the laborers are few. Pray therefore the Lord of the harvest, and he will send forth laborers into his harvest. Now, if we do the same thing right now, just take a step back. Look at the world around you. Look at the children, all the children that you see, all the new generation. Rather than being annoyed with that kid at Walmart who's screaming at his mom, rather than just being irritated with, what's wrong with these kids these days anyway? Rather than having that kind of perspective, take a step back like Jesus did and say, we need more people doing something for them. Our attempt right here is to build something for the youth and for the family. It's going to be our little project right here. And you know what? It's working. We've already got a couple new moms. We're going to keep on doing it. But we need more laborers in that vineyard. We also need more people being baptized. Maybe that's you today.